I'll give you a little bit about myself and why I'm here and what qualifies me to be up here. Um, I worked for Ford Motor Company for almost 30 years. I also worked at Intel and Amazon. So I've got a lot of corporate, big top Forbes top 50, Fortune top 50 company, corporate HR experience. My whole career's been in HR. It's been working with leaders in different ways. It's been in designing HR policies and practices. And the last few years at Ford, I was in learning and development, leadership development. We implemented leadership programs around the globe. And just, I think, during the time that I was in that role, we probably trained in the tens of thousands of leaders. And we always incorporated some sort of mindfulness programs in our leadership programs. So mindfulness was part of the fabric of how we defined leadership. I left in 2019. And since then, I've just been kind of doing my own thing, a little coaching, a little consulting, being a mom. I'm a homeschooling parent now. So I'm kind of busy, but I say I'm in a year 3 of a 5-year sabbatical. So on one hand, you could say, what are you doing? I'm not doing anything. And on the other hand, I'm doing a lot of stuff. I've got my hand in a lot of pots. But in 2019, when I left Ford, late that year, I joined Mindful Leader for the Survey Workplace Mindfulness Facilitator Program. And while I was in that program, part of our cohort, one of the groups, the question was coming up about how do we do compassionate performance reviews, right? How do we do some of these tough actions that companies have to take and do it with compassion? I think I see Dory coming in. I think maybe you were the person who asked the question when it first came up. How can companies have compassionate performance reviews? How can the process be more compassionate? We even talked about separations, which is maybe another toolkit that I'll work on. But in that community, I said, I think we talked about it for several weeks. People were looking for resources online. People were looking for expertise. And there really wasn't anything out there that specifically targeted this question. And I said, with my background, with my personal practice, with my background in mindfulness and leadership development and designing performance management programs, who else better than to kind of write something up in this space? So I took a stab at it and presented it to the CWMF organization, the group, the cohorts at the time. And now I'm here back while we're in person to kind of share it with you guys. I would love feedback on what I talk about here today. If you think there's more that we could include, if there's something else that would be helpful, be of service to the folks in companies, I'd love to hear it. We could update and do kind of a second revision. But for now, I do have an ebook that's available on my website. And I'm sorry I did not include it on my site, but my company right now is Lead Human, and it's just leadhuman.com. And there's a blog post, and I just put it right at the top of all the blog posts. So if anyone wants to just download the ebook, that's what I'm going to be talking through today. So it's free. It's for anyone to use. It's good information. So it's of service to folks in corporations to have more compassionate conversations. So when we think about performance reviews, how many of most folks have had some sort of performance evaluation, formal performance evaluation, right? Nodding heads, you don't have to raise your hand. Everybody's had it, unless you've worked in kind of different types of organizations that don't have them. I think about, so you've either received one or you've given performance reviews. In any case, it creates an environment where people can be stressed. And the last speakers that were here were talking about trauma in the workplace, right? And so even if you're really well-intended, the workplace can be a triggering environment. It can be a place that causes stress, right? And what is more of a prototypical stressful situation than sitting down to be judged by somebody else and they're telling them how they're judging you. And their reaction and their evaluation might not be how you see yourself. It might not be what you really think you did. And so it does create a lot of an environment of nervousness, of anxiety. In a second, I don't have my clicker in my hand. So in a lot of cases, we have an environment where there is uncertainty, right? You're not sure what you're going to be facing when you come into the conversation, and you could feel judged. You could have a lot of anxiety. And anything I'm going to say in this talk can work for people who are administering a performance review, giving the feedback to somebody else, or if you're receiving the feedback. You can use a lot of the micro practices and things that I'll talk about in either role. But it's just kind of bringing awareness, bringing mindfulness, bringing compassion to this opportunity. So instead of having an opportunity where you're sitting down with another person that puts you in a situation of disconnection, how can we think about this process where we can rewrite the script or rethink about this opportunity as one to create connection instead of disconnection? The way that these are handled in most companies is intentionally doesn't intentionally, but it just creates an environment of disconnection, power differentials, right? And just brings a lot of awareness to this separateness versus one of connection. So when I talk about connection, I love this quote that Brene Brown has that talks about how she defines connection. And there's 3 key words in here that I focus on, or that I think really inspired kind of what's in this ebook. And the first one is around energy, right? And how often do we sit down and we're having a performance kind of a conversation, and we think about energy, and we can move beyond the transactional nature of giving a performance discussion, right? A lot of times it's just a transaction that has to happen. The company tells us we have to have these conversations. You don't go into it with an intention to focus on the energy, to focus on that connection. You're just kind of getting it done. You've probably gotten, if you're the leader, you've gotten an email that says, reminder, you have to do these by the date, or the employee might be asking you for feedback. If you're an employee, you want to know, you've got the time on your calendar from your boss. But the idea here is to key in and develop sensitivity to the energy of the situation, right? Of what's going on between the two people. And that helps shift things from a mindset of fear into a more trusting kind of a collaboration. The second key word here is around judgment, right? The system, the process right now is set up so that one person is in a position of passing judgment on another person, and the other person is receiving judgment from someone else. Right? It couldn't be designed more perfectly to kind of create this separation between the people, or to create an environment where curiosity can't thrive, right? It's like you're coming in there, you're placed in this role, and if you're not mindful about the role that you're in, it's really easy to just kind of go by the script of what's automatic about what your role is in this situation. And so being mindful around having a performance conversation around judgment is, can we rethink the role to one where we're more curious about the other person? Even if you're in the leadership role, how can you be more curious about what that person's experience is? You might come in with a preconceived set of ideas about what that person's behavior was or how their performance was. And, you could tell them all of that. But that is not going to create connection. What could create connection is asking them about their experience and being curious about that. So around that is rethinking these words around judgment. You're not going to have connection unless that person can be give and receive without judgment. You want to keep that open, keep those lines of communication open. And the third piece is around sustenance and strength, right? You want to be able to leave that conversation feeling nourished, and having the person, both people, feeling like they've been seen and heard and valued in their conversation, and that their strengths are being honored. Right now, the way the process in most companies is set up, it's around a scarcity mindset, right? You've got typically a lot of companies, a certain number of people who can be identified as high achiever or excellent or whatever. You've got a certain financial pot that you're distributing among people. And so it's set up to create a sense of scarcity, that only certain people can get the good part of the conversation, of a good evaluation, versus going at it with a sense of abundance and finding out how can we create more for everybody? How can I create more for this person in this that I'm meeting as a leader? Even if it might not be a financial benefit, a financial incentive, even if it might not be that, but it can be, how can I create more for them in their experience around working here and working on my team? And so when you're doing that, there's a couple ways. And one is just kind of being aware, being mindful of what we're doing. Both the mind and the body are significant in how we come into the conversations, to shift away from these transactional nature of performance conversations to a more intentional nature, and to tune into the energy that the people are bringing to build that connection. It happens in both the mind and the body. So I'll talk about a little bit of each of those. And for the mind, the first one is just to examine your motivation, regardless of which side of that table you're on, whether you're in the leader role that's giving the feedback or you're in the employee role or accepting or receiving feedback in a traditional process. It's examine your motivation. What are you coming in with? Is there anything that's underlying how you're approaching this opportunity for connection? Interrogate yourself. Is there anything at odds with how Jacqueline talked about this morning? Challenge yourself to be of service to the other person, right? Big part of compassion, and she made the case for it this morning. But if you're challenging yourself to come into this conversation, how can I be of service to this other person, to the job, to the work that needs to get done, to the task, to the company, however you want to define that? How can you come at this with an intention of being at service? And then interrogate what your motivation is behind that, behind going into this conversation. Do you have any other maybe ulterior motives, right? I have personally been, in a leadership role for 20 or more years. And I was thinking this morning, I've probably given almost 200 performance reviews during that time. And I know there have been times where I have wanted to maybe get back at somebody. I was giving a performance review. It's not my proudest moment, but there's an employee, maybe who's made my life very frustrating or didn't deliver a project on time. And I just wanted to use that opportunity to kind of tell them how I was feeling, be a little frustrated with them, get that off my chest, right? So this would be an opportunity to sit down and interrogate my mindset before I went into that opportunity, right? If I'm not in the right headspace before I go into that meeting, that's going to just create more distance between us as people trying to work towards some sort of common goal for the good of the company, for the good of the work that needs to be done. It could be that you want to let someone know that you're unhappy about some progress on a project that hasn't been made to your satisfaction, or maybe you just want to get through it with the least amount of drama, right? Maybe there's some hard message that you need to send somebody upward to a manager or downward to an employee. Use the traditional kind of way of thinking about it. But you don't want to say it because it's just going to create drama and you don't know how to say it. And so you just want to get through it without this topic coming up. Or maybe you want to just keep on all the armor that you've built up and you don't want to be vulnerable in any way. Or maybe you're the employee going into this review and you just want your boss to be happy. You want them to think well of you. You want them to recognize your contribution. And that's all you're looking at. So just take a moment before you go into these conversations to think about, what is that mindset? What position are you coming at this from? Is there a position that you have that you could hold more lightly, that you could maybe let go before you come in conversation, and then replace that with, how can I be of service to this other person in the moment that we're meeting, to the work, to the company, and try to meet in those different ways. All of those other motivations that I talked about before kind of keep us in this sense of disconnection and in a traditional approach and with a transactional mindset. So if you recognize one of those motivations, not to shame yourself, but just to allow it, to recognize it, to name it, and to then move on and think of the challenge question around how can we be of service to each other. The second step is recognizing the other person's humanity. since I'm talking to a lot of people here who you're mindfulness practitioners, you're aware of meditations, you're aware of these kinds of things. You're probably aware of Just Like Me meditation of the lake, right? Where you can really sit down and think. You can do a meditation, and there's a text of one in the ebook where you can recognize that this other person is just like you. They have hopes and fears just like you. They want to do a good job just like you. They want to be seen and heard and valued in the job just like you. They probably have all kinds of stuff going on outside work just like you. They make mistakes just like you. And it could be simple, honest mistakes. But the more you can kind of recognize their humanity, recognize that they are just like you, recognize that they can be an avatar of you, of a representation of you in a different space, in a different time, in a different role, you're going to approach that with a different mindset. You're going to get more out of that conversation. You're going to be more in connection while you're having that discussion with the person. And then the third part is assuming positive intent. I've had a lot of managers, I've had a lot of employees where it's real easy to slip into this mindset of, there's that person's just a bad egg, right? Or you hear people talking about a colleague and say, they just are trying to mess everything up. I don't know why. They're putting a monkey wrench in the system, whatever. We've all of us who worked in corporate, you could probably think of similar stories where you have these labels that come up and you think about people in maybe the less than positive way, right? And it's just a reminder to assume positive intent. Everybody is trying to do the best with what they have, what they've been given, the resources, the knowledge, the interactions, the relationships that they have are all going to be very different than yours. And so they may just be doing the best with what they've got. And you just have to assume that they're working from the best intention. And then the fourth piece here around mindset is taking a moment to just feel into your compassion. So Jacqueline did the exercise this morning around separating the recognizing empathy versus compassion, right? And taking a moment to just feel into that compassion around being of service. And you can even do a quick micro practice here around just taking, like Rich Fernandez was talking about earlier with the 3 breath exercise, take 3 breaths. Or take more breaths if you want. But just put hand on your heart, one hand on your heart, the other hand kind of open to, as a metaphor, connection to the other person. Take a breath in for yourself, and then and breathe out. When you take another breath in, this is in for the other person. Breathe out. And then the third breath is a breath for you together. And how can you be of service to each other? And breathe out. And notice how that might feel for you, where you might feel that in the body, how you might connect with that person, even in your mind before you meet with that person through your breath. So there's several things you can do just to kind of get your mindset in a right place to have more compassion when you have these conversations. And then the next piece is around the body. And we've had a lot of speakers here recently who've been talking about the body. So I'm going to jump through these a little quickly. But, recognizing, and I think a lot of folks have said that emotions, the way we behave, the way we think, act, and feel starts in our body in a lot of ways. And it's subconscious to us. It's automatic. Our bodies have created these protective, defensive mechanisms, right, that might influence how we're reacting in the moment. And so this is around attuning to what's going on in your body and how that might be setting you up for more of a compassionate, connected experience or a disconnected, transactional kind of experience. And so, as a species, we've developed this over time, and it's good. It's self-protective. We organize toward avoiding threat and moving towards safety. We've got our autonomic nervous system. A few speakers have gone into this. Again, won't do a whole lot here, but the parasympathetic nervous system is where our safe social engagement network. The sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, and then the dorsal vagal nervous system, then where we're in immobilization or freeze. And what that might look like in a work environment is if you're in the social engagement system, you're more in connection with others, you're more open to conversation, to curiosity, to exploration, to connection. But just recognizing for yourself, if you tend to be more bristling or irritable or frustrated, that you may be coming from a place where your fight or flight nervous system is a little bit more activated. And that might keep you out of connection a bit, right? Or you might be coming from a place of dissociation or numbing or procrastination and avoidance, or you might be coming from the dorsal vagal activation, passive defense. But the idea here is just to check in with yourself where you are, not labeling any of it as good or bad, but recognizing that it is. All of these are self-protective. All of these are good states for your body. But the idea here is just to recognize where you're coming from, recognize the level of safety that your body is telling you that it's feeling at that moment, and recognizing that it could have an impact as you move into this conversation with another person. And then the fourth piece around this, around the body, is putting yourself in their shoes. And so just recognizing that just for you, you could be coming into this conversation in a place of a activation of a sympathetic or a dorsal vagal nervous system fight or flight or freeze, and maybe having difficulty connecting in a open, engaged, curious dialogue. So for the other person, they might not be feeling entirely safe for reasons that have nothing to do with this conversation that you're having with them, but they might be having, some activation there as well, right? So you might be talking to an employee. This is where I think a lot of times in corporate world, labels get used, right? This person just wants to avoid everything. I think we've done for years, we would do, I think there's a conflict instrument that shows how you manage conflict in corporate world, right? And you could be good at collaborative kind of conflict problem solving. You could avoid conflict. You could just go at it with a really aggressive approach. And those could all be just ways of representations of how your nervous system is activated in that moment. But in corporate worlds, those tend to label people. This guy's a little aggressive. This guy's a little, he's not going to like that, what you're going to tell him. He's going to be a little angry. He's going to, talk back. He's going to be angry. He's going to go report something to somebody or whatever, right? And just recognizing that this could just be a sign that they're not feeling entirely safe in that conversation that you're having with them, and thinking of it from that perspective puts you in a position, if you're in your compassion, where you can think about, well, what can I do? How can I show up to be in service of that person in that state? Now, the last few slides that I have here is around those difficult messages. Some of these points I've heard sprinkled through some of the other conversations, but a lot of us, we've had to deliver tough messages to people, right? You might want to as a leader. There's tough messages you need to tell people for their own good, or the company might just tell you you have to deliver some tough messages if you're in a layoff situation or something like that, but it happens. And so how can you handle those? And I've got what I've kind of called, for the sake of this book, ABCs of difficult messages. And it's around attending mindfully, behaving calmly, or just being calm in your presence and communicating clearly. And so we'll just go through those few slides here. So attending mindfully is around removing distractions, gifting the other person with your attention, being fully present for them, clearing your mind, thinking about your intention, the things that we talked about before with your mindset, asking for feedback about yourself. There's more studies over time that say that people will respond to feedback more if you create this ongoing sense of giving and receiving feedback, which is, from a leader's perspective, more effective if you're very vocal about asking for feedback for yourself. If you don't go into every situation with, I'm going to tell you what I think, I'm going to tell you how I'm evaluating you, I'm going to tell you what your shortcomings are, I'm going to tell you what I see your strengths to be. But if you just talk about or ask for feedback about yourself, you create more of a culture of giving and receiving feedback around honest, tough messages. Listening for everything that's being communicated beyond just the words, but the emotions, the tone, the voice, the nonverbal cues, all of those good listening habits. Remembering every understanding could be a misunderstanding. I heard this phrase a couple of years ago and I love it, because what that means is everything you think you know about the other person, every understanding you have in your own mind is an opportunity for a misunderstanding. So as soon as you say, I know this about you, or I think this about you, or you said you're from, this university, or you used to work at this company, or you used to do this job, I think I have an idea of what that means to me. And that could create opportunity for misunderstanding. So if you can use this as mantra, it teaches you to ask questions, validate those assumptions, ask about those understandings you have. And so the last one is staying curious and testing those assumptions. But if you can gift the person with your mindfulness, with your presence, and then when you're in those conversations that are difficult, be calm, be a calm presence for them. You might still have to say some difficult messages. Describe if they're giving you a difficult message, right? Or if you're the person on the receiving end of the difficult message, you can describe your reaction, but you don't have to necessarily pressure the other person to change, especially if you're in a power position and they're saying something you don't like. You can say, I'm having a reaction to what you're saying, but they have the right to have their opinion. They have the right to have their perspective, and you don't have to like it, right? And without blaming them for their for opinion or perspective. Say your piece and let it go. Don't be attached to what the other person does with it. And then along with that, hold your perspective lightly. Be open-minded about what you think to be true. It's only opinion. Like I said from the last slide, your understanding could be a misunderstanding. Consider any of your own emotional triggers. Especially if you're sitting down to give people feedback, that's something that can affect their life, like a layoff, or you're firing somebody, or you're making decisions that are going to impact their pay, right? You need to be in a good place with your own emotional triggers and knowing what might set you into an emotional state or might trigger your nervous system activation. Usually when you find yourself in a position where you might be criticizing others, that is because you have some unresolved emotional baggage that you need to look at and you need to interrogate in yourself. And that's where you can get a good trusted friend, get a coach, get a colleague, that you can kind of talk through with those things and put yourself in a position of being able to deliver this news in a much more neutral way. And then consider your own emotional state, managing anxiety, mistrust, hurt, anything that you might already be bringing that could take you out of connection in those moments. And then the last one is around just communicating clearly. I know a few other folks have said this in the sessions today around clear is kind, share information with people. If you focus on that top line, you're being of service. Being compassionate is around building that connection with the person. That's how you can be of service. That's one way. Value the relationship and caring for the individual beyond the message that you have to give them. If you come at with that mindset, you'll be amazed at kind of the options or the opportunities, the ways that you can deliver the message kind of open up for you in terms of having that connection with the other person. Check in with your mind and your body. Be direct and fearless. But remember, your intention, if you've gotten there, is to be helpful, is to be of service. So you're coming at it from a place of care. Being candid and direct, clear is kind. Obviously describing if you're in a leadership position where you're wanting to tell somebody that they didn't deliver something that you wanted, help them by painting what exactly you want to see them do. Paint done, I think Brene Brown calls it. Describe what a super successful completion of this project would look like, what you would love to see in your wildest dreams, and help them really resonate with what you're telling them. But remain open to dialogue. Again, hold that perspective lightly. ask them if it's doable and have a conversation around that. And then we've all heard about the feedback sandwich, the dreaded feedback sandwich. You don't use it. You have to deliver negative feedback or something that might be a difficult message. Don't sandwich it with something positive and then hit it with something gut-wrenching and then stick something positive around it. It's insincere, and people are not going to. I think it erodes the trust that you're trying to build in the relationship. Just be direct with what you need to tell them. Trust that they're an adult. You've brought them in here. They've got skills and capabilities, and they can do their job well, and they can take some hard feedback every now and then deliver it with caring, with the intention of being in service. And then recognizing that keeping some information from the other person just might do more harm than just telling them, what you need to tell them. So I think that's the last slide that I have. Right, this good quote by my Angelou. So I've learned that people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, that they'll never forget how you made them feel. And so if you go into the conversations, again, if you're giving the feedback or if you're receiving the feedback, you go in with this mindset that you want the other person to feel seen, heard, valued, in connection, and empowered for their strengths. It's going to be a much more positive opportunity for these performance review conversations. I'm sorry, I thought before I came in here, I didn't say my joke. It was like, performance reviews have a PR problem. It's a geeky HR joke, get it, PR, performance review. And so, that's what happens when you work 30 years in HR. You lose your sense of humor. But that's all I have. I think I'm at the end of my time. So thank you for my